Hello everybody, it's Steve Barrett here. We're on our regular weekly podcast, the PR Week, in the studio. This is the Facebook Live part of it, so we're going to start recording in a short while. We've got Renee Wilson here from the PR Council. Very pleased to have Renee with us, and Frank Washkuch, news editor. Welcome, Frank. And Alison Kansky behind the dials. So yeah, nice, very quiet week, not much going on, was there? Not much to talk about, yeah.
We'll try to think of something.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll find something to talk about. But let's get straight into it. I would ask for Facebook comments, but we've had quite a few of those in the past week, so you feel free not to comment if you don't really want to, and to try and keep them polite, unlike some of the people who've been commenting this week. All right, let's go. Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PR Week. Going to guide you gently through the next 20, maybe 25 minutes with quite a lot to talk about this week. Yeah, it's been a busy week, I think is the understatement of the year. But we're delighted to have with us Renee Wilson, who's President of the PR Council. Renee, great to have you here.
And I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
Especially in a week like this.
You did pick a good week.
Yeah, I know.
And, yeah.
Quite lucky.
Renee just named to the PR Week Hall of Fame, which is a great initiative we started last year, just holding that up for our Facebook Live viewers, the cover of our April issue. And we've got Frank Washkuch here, who's our news editor. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm well, thank you.
Holding up?
Holding up, yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, indeed. So, what should we talk about this week? Anyone got any ideas?
There's really not much going
No.
on.
All right.
But
Well, yeah, United Airlines, you may have noticed there was a little furore around that, so we'll talk about that. Very sad week for PR, actually. We lost one of the real giants of the industry at the weekend, Al Golin, the founder of Golin, then Golin Harris and various other iterations over the years. Really sad, but a great man, and we'll talk about Al, and there were a couple of other great industry stalwarts who passed away in recent weeks too. So we'll talk about that. Uber continues to shed senior executives, this time their head of communications, Rachel Whetstone, very high profile person. We'll talk about that. And Sean Spicer, he remains the sort of most famous PR person in the world, and yeah, he's staying in the headlines, I think it's fair to say. So we'll talk about Sean. And anything else, if we need anything else to talk about, that catches our attention. So let's talk about United. Well, no, let's talk to Renee first.
yeah, thanks.
Let's do the easy bit. Renee, how long have you been in post at the council now? Is it?
Almost a year and a half.
Wow,
I know.
that is longer than I thought. So
Yeah, that's crazy, right?
yeah, you came over from an MSL to lead the council. Tell us about what you've done in that time and what you're most proud of and what you want to achieve sort of for the rest of this year.
Well, I mean, I think like most people, the first 100 days or so, you're evaluating what's going on with your organization, and last year was really kind of learning and putting some pieces into place. But I'm excited because I've really put a focus much more on showcasing the fact that agencies that offer public relations can thrive in the integrated marketing mix. Like, this isn't a survival for PR agencies at all. This is our time. So everything that we're doing is through the lens of how is this going to help agencies thrive in this integrated marketing world. So I have a big initiative working more with the marketing and CMO community. Not to say that our PR clients aren't important, because they absolutely are, but we see that those CMO budgets are poised to grow 4 to 5% year on year for the balance of the decade, and they seem to be interested in what we're doing as well. So we had our first big CMO breakfast a couple weeks ago, and it was just filled with really good insights. We also have a big push on diversity. As we have the good fortune to partner with PR Week on the Diversity Awards, we also are
doing that for 6 years. I think,
and we are also trying to do more at the council in terms of executing on all of the reams of research that have taken place over the years about, the importance of retention. So what does that look like? So we have a lot of programs there. This was our first year to do a diversity census. Just got the results back. It's not for publicity purposes. It's really because you can't manage what you can't measure. So we need a benchmark to know how well or how not well we're doing in different areas. So that's been a big effort, which is important. And then there's been a real kind of like rising of the great female leaders within the council that started a Women of the Council initiative and launched a She Quality project. And Weber Shandwick, who Gail Hyman is on our board, and she enlisted Weber to help us put together a video to just highlight the fact that women have made great progress in the public relations industry, not quite at the tippy top of some of the top 10 firms. There's no female CEOs yet, but I think females are doing great in terms of progress, but there's still a ways to go. So this initiative that was started is all about women helping women. So what that means is that we looked at some of the barriers to the top for women. One being, real good operational prowess and understanding the P&L. That's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you want to be the CEO, it better be.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So we've enlisted some of our female leaders. We've got Virginia Devlin of Current and great lady Cynthia Kalk from Weber Shandwick are going to do the P&L workshop for us in Chicago. Dale Bornstein and Julie Hukin from Global Strategy Group, and as you know, Dale's from M Booth. They're going to be doing a workshop on owning and navigating the room. Julie at GSG has done some great research about the perceptions of female leaders and female agency leaders. So, and then finally, Barry Rafferty and possibly Karen Van Bergen, we're working on schedules, are going to do a workshop on chasing the C-suite. So those are 3 workshops, and then we have...
so you haven't been very busy at all.
No, oh wait, don't stop
there's
me.
More, there's
yes,
more.
And then we have dinners going on. Again, this is about women helping women. So this is all on our website. In Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, New York, San Fran, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. Women that are in the PR Council that want to learn from each other, go to these dinners. What we say is don't leave until you figured out 3 ways you can help somebody else in the room. And that's just, it's really just kind of, pulling in your peers and trying to help each other. So that's how.
Yeah, I wrote a piece called "Sending the Elevator Back Down" a few weeks ago, and that was on that subject. It was from an ad. No, sorry, it was an ad event I went to. But we're all friends now.
No, we are all friends. Right.
But it's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you said there. We're just in the middle of our agency business reports. That's our biggest focus on PR agencies throughout the year. And a lot of the things that you said resonated there. Yes, women are 70% of the industry, but they certainly don't make up 70% of leadership. Although I think in the 7 years I've been editing PR, I think it is getting better. And if you look at leaders like Karen Van Bergen and Donovan Imperator at Conan Wolf, you've got Marjorie Krause at APCO, you've got Gail, who's in the number 2 position, and Barry Rafferty. So I think things are improving, and that is going to get better. But it's obviously a lot of work to be done there. And the whole way that PR agencies are positioning themselves is changing totally.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? And the way they're going to market, and especially the holding company firms.
Yes, no, they are. And I mean, and I know PR Week does a good job of covering different perspectives outside of PR as well. And I think that that's important for all of us as agencies are positioning themselves, recognizing that the world has changed, the world is continuing to transform, and that you have different clients that, whether or not they're in the C-suite or they're in the marketing department, they are looking for different things from agencies.
Yeah, for sure. And we're a little mini holding company in our own right, because we have campaign, covers advertising, we have medical marketing and media, we have DMN, which covers direct marketing, we're global. So we're joining those dots up a lot more than we used to as well. And
makes you better, makes you stronger.
Yeah, it does. And we take content from globally and vertically and horizontally from the matrix of content.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I think it is.
The other thing you seem to have done is be a bit more active on the sort of industry lobbying and just being out there, really, and making statements. You made a statement on the Pepsi incident last week. You've done some great work with the CAN organisation in trying to get the definition of PR better suited to what PR is, because it was a really strange definition,
It
wasn't
certainly
it?
was
So
strange.
talk a little bit about the thought leadership stuff that you've been doing.
Well, I just think that I'm fortunate to have this role at this time in the life cycle of the industry. But if I'm not out there speaking on our behalf, then I'm not doing my job. So with CAN, I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer. The definition was wrong, and the entry form was just not relevant. So it was very important that myself and other leaders from the industry, worked with them to say this is how it's got to roll, and they want it to work. They're learning too. They recognize that advertising people who've never worked in PR really can't write the entry form. So I feel better about how this year looks for us going into it. You know, the proof will be in the pudding, and so we'll see how things go.
Yeah, and Karen Van Bergen is the chair of jury this year, the PR chair of jury. So, you know, what do you think? Does it matter that PR firms don't tend to do as well in the PR category? Although, actually, weirdly, last year they did much better in other categories. In fact, including Edelman, which won the Platinum, one of the top awards. Although that REI campaign didn't do so well in the PR awards.
I know.
What's your thoughts on that whole?
I think we do. I think it's important that PR does well everywhere it can, because I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't believe it. I really believe that public relations is best suited to help businesses solve problems right now. And I really think, though, that we do need to do well in our own category, because otherwise it causes confusion for clients that walk the hall of work there and they see, look at that fabulous campaign, my gosh, that they moved the needle on X, Y, and Z, and they sold X, Y, and blah, blah. And who did that? Oh, okay, so-and-so advertising. Okay, great, I'll call them. You know, that's why it is important that public relations agencies do that.
They're going to sort the crediting out a bit better, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
All the agencies, not just the PR firms. I mean, the media, I used to edit Media Week, and the media agencies had the same thing.
Right.
The PR awards have only been around, what, 8, 9 years maybe?
Yeah, that is about 8 years.
You know, media had to fight hard for its corner, and I guess that's what you're doing, and that's what the industry is doing.
Yes, and it's important, and I'm so glad that Karen is going to be our PR jury president. But it's important that on the jury, it's people that understand public relations, that come from public relations agencies. I remember when I was the jury president, I had two that weren't from a public relations agency, and that was, you know, that's a bit tricky. You want to be inclusive, but if you haven't been trained the same way that these other experts have been, then you're really not qualified to judge. Yeah, no,
for sure. All right, well, we can reflect on some of these issues in the news coverage, Frank. Well, let's start with United Airlines, obviously. The biggest story of the week, this crazy, horrific video of the passenger being taken off the flight 3144, was it? Or 3411, I should know that off by heart after the last week. And it just blew up into a storm of, you know, on social media, and immediately became a crisis for United. And they probably, and let's just say up front, yes, PR Week did award the CEO of United Airlines the Communicator of the Year award in our awards for the period of last year, and there were good reasons why we did that, and we stand by the reasons and the choice at the time. And clearly, if we were awarding now, we wouldn't pick United Airlines or Oscar Munoz. But we'll talk about why now, because Frank, talk about the communications response.
Yeah, this is still unraveling in a lot of different ways, but in terms of the communications response specifically, Munoz, in the letter that he sent to United staffers, he came down very hard on the passenger himself, who was removed, no pun intended, from the plane. And when he talked about how the passenger was disruptive and things like that, it really rubbed people the wrong way on the outside. Instead of really taking responsibility for the situation and saying it will never happen again, which he did in the later days, and he did in the Good Morning America interview on Wednesday morning. But he didn't do that immediately, and it made it look like he was talking out of both sides of his mouth, and that he was starting to take responsibility in the external statement, but not in the internal statement. And so I think a lot of people believe he missed a big opportunity to crack down on the situation much earlier and much more seriously.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say if he'd come out with that statement and that interview the day after, you know, it wouldn't have mitigated the incident. It was a horrific incident.
Right.
And if you look at the Chicago Air Police statement straight after the event, they put their officer on administrative leave, and they said it was unacceptable and not in line with their guidelines. And that was a better response, actually, from the Chicago Air Aviation Department.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the way that they responded, they almost responded like a police department does when there's a shooting that involves a police officer, which is to say, we're going to put this person on leave until the investigation wraps up. So that shows how seriously they took it.
From Renee, looking at it as an observer, I mean, from a crisis communications point of view, you've got to act quickly sometimes.
Right.
I mean, sometimes you maybe do have to just take a step back, but if you're going to do that, you should at least put a holding statement out in that we're investigating. But the way this was done with the tweet and with the letter, it just seemed a bit tone deaf, didn't it, from a communications point of view?
Well, I think that, no one is pleased with how it has unfurled. But the thing, though, that I would think we would all agree is that Oscar has an incredible track record of being a leader who's honest with integrity, and he does show empathy. And it was such a strange series
Disconnect.
It's a strange series of events, and I'm wondering, again, unless you're in the room where it happens, you don't really know what happened. I mean, perhaps he was under-resourced or not properly resourced to be able to react in the way that he's known to have acted in the past. But you're absolutely right. You do need to have a plan always, and in this day and age, a plan that covers a whole host of new areas, and you do need to have some sort of holding statement.
I'm actually surprised that they weren't better prepared for this, because I remember about a year and a half ago when I was interviewing the chief communications person at JetBlue, she was talking about how they have just a book that's like the size of 3 phone books that prepares people for any kind of crisis you can imagine at an airline. And you would think this sort of thing would have been covered in there.
Yeah, I think there's no real playbook for this. This is we'll talk about this with some other stories about Uber, about Pepsi, about Sean Spicer. This is the new playbook for communicators, isn't it? This is where the battleground, if you like, where things are with great opportunities, but also great chance to fail as well.
But Oscar did come right out and say, there's always time to do the right thing. Like I thought, his Good Morning America interview was very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what should have come out immediately, wasn't it? I think they'd obviously, maybe they got some advice, maybe the first responses were more led by the legal department, who knows? Like you say, we weren't in the room and we can only speculate on that. I think the other thing is, and I mentioned this on some of the media that I've done this week, because obviously...
You did media this week?
Yes, indeed. PR Week became part of the story because of the Communicator of the Year thing. These are always pitched as PR nightmares, aren't they? But really, these are operational nightmares. Right. The problems here were the process for overbooking flights and the process for getting people off a plane. Mm-hmm. Those are the 2 problems here. Now, they became a communications problem afterwards, and there was a poor response. But these are operational problems that need to be sorted out. And PR tends to get blamed, doesn't it, for these things, when actually it's a business operational thing. And that's why PR people need to be in the room, I think.
That's right. That's absolutely
not only when they're communicating, but also when they're putting these policies together, the strategy of the whole business.
I don't understand how any company in 2017 and moving forward could make a decision without their PR council. Yeah. I think it's dangerous. I think you're playing with fire.
Especially in a service industry where you're customer facing and you're a retail, hotel, or a travel environment, because that's and really every member of your staff is your first layer of communication, isn't it? And that's what Oscar actually had been really good at. He'd engaged staff, he turned around the morale at the company, he got the union deals done, he'd increased customer service and on-time levels, the share price was up, his coverage was amazing.
Right,
so
because he's a good leader.
Yeah, so this is why it was slightly surprising. So yeah, lots of lessons to be learned. It's not done yet, I'm sure. This one will run and run, and clearly, for the price of getting some couple of people to get off the flight, it looks like it's going to cost United a bit more in a legal case that's coming up with the passenger, and our sympathies and thoughts with the passenger, because that was a horrific experience to go through. And the other thing United has done is they're going to refund the cost of the flights of everyone on the plane, because it was a stressful experience for everyone. They should have done that straight away. Yeah, for sure. I agree with you.
Well, I mean, I think though too, things are moving so quickly for them, right? I mean, it's nowadays brands are moving with the time scale. It's like they're in a pressure cooker.
Yeah, no, they are. Okay, so sad news this weekend with the passing of Al Golin at the age of 87, one of the real founding fathers of the PR industry, along with Dan Edelman and Harold Burson and David Finn. Great guy. Was lucky enough to meet him a few times, and a real gentleman and a real humble guy, but also a real pioneer. And famously cold called Ray Kroc at McDonald's and got that account, and they've still got it like 60 years later.
Oh, it's amazing.
So what and that follows on. It's been a sad period for PR, with Pam Edstrom passing, from one of the founders of Wagner Edstrom, now and Gershon Kext as well over at Kext. So we've lost 3 fantastic pioneers of our industry.
That's right.
Renee, your thoughts on Al? And I know Gershon used to work at MSL, which is part of Publicis, and so was Kext. So what were your thoughts on their careers and contributions?
Well, I think I mean, Al Golan is just such a legend, and from what you said about how he did cold call Ray Kroc, I mean, that's just amazing. That's so inspiring. And then he has that wonderful saying, fix it before it's broke.
Yeah.
I mean, he just was such a man of integrity. And I know there's a lot of amazing people in PR these days, and everyone has integrity that is in PR, at least that they should, but he just was genuine. And I know that the folks at Golan now are going through such a tough time, but what a great, inspiring story for all of us. I mean, he practically created CSR. I mean, what he did with the Ronald McDonald House and everything. I mean, that's just like
For sure, yeah.
that is like that's textbook.
I remember actually the first time I met him was when they introduced their G4 model, which is very revolutionary,
Right.
really tearing up the
Right.
playbook.
Fix it before
no
it's
job,
broke.
no job titles,
Yeah.
and it's worked for Golan actually. It took a while to bed in, like something like that would. But I was talking to Fred Cook, and Fred who's the chairman of Golan now, was CEO then, and he said, they got Al involved and said, what do you think, Al? We're going to change everything. No one's going to have offices, and you're going to be sitting out with the stuff. He says, well, as long as I can keep my chair. And Al was more up for it than some of the senior staffers at Golan. This fix it before it breaks thing was really something that guided his business career, and I think is a great motto for people to run their lives and their business by. So very sad. And just a quick word on Gershon. That was somebody you knew. Totally different type of field he was in.
I should caveat though, I was not a friend of Gershon's. I just recall when Publicis purchased Kext, there was a big meeting that he was in, and I happened to be in it, and just a real gentleman. Just at the time I was not in as senior of a position as I was when I left MSL, and just was incredibly kind and respectful, and didn't make me feel like the only woman in the room.
Yeah, I think that's the thread that runs through all three of these people: Pam, Gershon, and Al. Real humble people, but with great integrity.
Right. I didn't know Pam either, but I've heard amazing things about her too.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, let's move on. Frank, Uber.
Yes.
Well, that's a brand.
Different one every day, isn't it?
That's a brand in trouble, and they've lost Rachel Whetstone now after Jeff Jones had left and David Plouffe left last year.
And that's not even the most recent crisis story at Uber. The most recent crisis story is that a website called The Information reported that Uber had a program called Hell. This is what they actually called
for
it.
Lyft,
right? Which allowed them to track Lyft drivers in the neighborhoods or areas they were in by essentially creating fake Lyft accounts and pinging them from different places. And it also let them figure out who was driving both for Uber and for Lyft, which they shouldn't really have a problem with because, as we all know, Uber claims these people aren't actually their employees, that they're just general contractors who just happen to work for them sometimes. So why would they care? Yeah. But more prominently for us, Rachel Whetstone left Uber earlier this week. That was sort of a ticking clock, wasn't it? I think a lot of people were waiting to see how much longer she was going to stay there amid a lot of crises happening at once. Of course, she's a veteran of Google. And
British political scene, used to work with Tony Blair.
That's right, and was the first employee of
Tim Allen at Portland.
That's right. Yeah. So interesting career there.
Very much so, yeah. What do you think of that, Renee? Because when you're looking at when Uber was having its problems with the engineer and the so-called inherent sexism at the company, and the CEO was filmed in an Uber, not in a very flattering light. When you're trying to represent a brand like that, it must be very difficult to go out and rep it, especially in the communications function, if you can't really
affect the change that you.
Well, yeah, and if you really, frankly, the culture of the place just doesn't tally with your own personal beliefs, it's impossible, really, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah, no, I think that is difficult. If your organization does not align with your own personal values, I'm not sure you can work somewhere. I've not met her. And again, I wasn't in the room when it happened, so I don't know what exactly she was dealing with there. Only what I read and observe, but I'm sure it was challenging. It had to have been.
Yeah. What about this has come up quite a few times recently. PR people, you can't go out and lie.
No.
Okay, and you might be asked, and this came up with Sean Spicer, I think,
Right.
especially with his first press conference.
Right.
And there was a big discussion about, well, where you must not go out and lie, but sometimes, presumably, you do have to go out and rep a point of view that you don't necessarily agree with, but that's the decision the company or organisation you've worked for has made, and you have to do it. How is that as an ethical conundrum for a PR professional?
Well, but Steve, I don't think people would. I don't think PR people would lie. Like, I don't think they would work.
No,
there
no,
anymore.
I don't mean lying. I mean, sometimes there's going to be a decision made
That
you're
you
going to
don't
have
agree
to
with.
that you don't agree with.
Right, right.
Yeah, the lying thing I think is clear cut.
Right.
But every PR pro must at some point have had to go out and rep something that they didn't necessarily agree with themselves, but that
Right.
was the organisational line or policy.
Understand, right. But I think that as long as you are not breaking ethics and you are not lying, I mean, if you're working for, I'm just going to use a random company, if you're working for McDonald's and they say they're no longer going to be serving hamburgers and you have to go out there and you disagree with it, that's your job. Like but if they were saying that they were going to do something unethical, then you should resign and leave.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you're not going to always agree if your company decides to only sell purple shoes. Like, you're going to have to rep the company.
Yeah.
But if it's unethical or if it's illegal, I mean, you should leave.
I would certainly disagree with not selling hamburgers in any place.
But I think this brings us on to our next topic, Sean Spicer, because a lot of people said at the time of the first press conference, the notorious one where he literally had to go out there and say that talk about the inauguration crowd,
Right.
that he should have resigned and just refused to do it because it was clearly, well, I'm not going to get into whether the crowd was as bigger or not, but people have said that, haven't they? And he's had a rocky road. We've talked about it a lot. We've interviewed him. Sean's a decent guy trying to do a really tough job.
Yes.
Some would say an impossible job.
Sure.
But he certainly hasn't had his best week this week. He really, that press conference was a disaster, and
Okay.
the sort of
Yeah.
the Hitler and the chemical weapons and it just went from bad to worse, to be honest.
Right.
Even down to pronouncing President Assad's name and things like this. And it feels like this can't go on like this. I mean, he is the most high-profile PR person in the world, isn't he? So,
Yes.
and he's a representative of the profession. That you are running an industry body, as part of it. It's obviously on the agency side, but these
Right.
things are all mixed up. So, what are your views? I mean, it doesn't paint the profession in a great light, does it?
Unfortunately, I don't think it does. The bedrock of public relations is credibility, transparency, authenticity. I don't think there's any room at all for lying. And I guess, one could say he should have just resigned when he was asked to say something that maybe was not substantiated with facts.
Do you think that he's going to make it much longer after what's being called on the Hitler press conference from earlier this week?
My personal opinion, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I can't be more emphatic about it. I'm not sure, because I have to say every time I think I've figured things out, something else comes on in the news in the morning and I'm shocked. So
Yeah.
it's hard to predict this administration.
I think this is one of the toughest jobs in the world anyway. In President
Yes, it is.
Obama's first administration, I think they went through communications,
Yep.
press secretaries, like 3 or 4 in the first.
Well, they went through a lot of communications directors.
Yeah.
And, Gibbs made it a few years for sure, and he's at
Right.
McDonald's now, of course. It's
Robert Gibbs.
Robert Gibbs, yeah. It's hard to figure out how Spicer got to such a bad Hitler analogy. I mean, it's not like you really have to make a hard case that, Assad is a bad guy. The evidence is already out there and everybody's already seen the video. I mean, you don't really have to make that comparison. So it's difficult to see why he went there in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the judgment and the performance. I mean, every press conference is now it's like a highly rated TV show, isn't it?
Certainly
TV
is.
event. So every
And if
word.
you miss it, you can watch it on SNL.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, every word is is sort of dissected. It's a tough, impossible job. I guess the one thing that's keeping him in the role is that who else is going to take a job like that on? You know, it's not. You know, are you going to have a long line of people who are going to want to do that job?
But as you rightly pointed out, it is a very important role for the country, for the profession. I really want the administration to get it right, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I would like to see him doing well, just from a personal and professional point of view. Nobody wants to see someone in a difficult situation, but you know, at some point it has to change a bit, and it has to change up. All right, listen, it was a fascinating discussion, Renee. One of the busier weeks we've had, and thanks for joining us. Good luck with your continued work at the council. It's great to see what you're doing over there. Congrats on your Hall of Fame nomination. Frank, thanks for all your hard work this week. It's been great, and producing some great content in and amongst the trolling on the social media, etc.
I've had my helmet on.
Yeah, and well, we'll see you next time on the PR Week.